Now in Buncombe County, more than 208,000 people are registered compared to 196,000 in 2020 for the primary. Across Western North Carolina and the nation, the expected Trump-Biden rematch is an all but done deal.
I think we're the definition of a battleground state or a purple state.
Political experts predict both candidates will come here to stump. As for yesterday's primary,
our numbers in turnout were down compared to 2020, mainly because Trump pretty much already had the Republican nomination wrapped up.
Political experts say that, combined with Biden as an incumbent without a challenger, kept the numbers down. In Buncombe County's Republican primary, Trump got more than 63% of Republican votes to Haley's 33%. Haley now out.
North Carolina will be a state, because it's competitive, that will have lots and lots of advertising.
There are now more voters registered in both Buncombe and Henderson counties than for the entire 2020 presidential election cycle. And that was still a year with local high interest of 78% of voters in both counties turning out.
Voters were engaged. This year they're telling us they're tired of both candidates, but their dislike for one or the other candidate is one of those things that will motivate them to show up to vote.
We haven't actually voted for a Democrat for president since 2008, Barack Obama's first term.
North Carolina has 16 electoral votes. Trump won the state in 2020, but of course he lost the general to Biden. What we'll continue to watch is the number of new registrations running up to November. In 2020, 66% of all eligible voters nationwide cast ballots.
Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
And we just watched the State of the Union, Dan. It's late. It's 8:45 Pacific time. I don't know how people on the East Coast do this.
I mean, we used to do it.
I know. We were a lot younger. We are fortunate to have White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She'll be joining us a little bit later. But first, Joe Biden just gave a humdinger of a State of the Union, Dan. He really enjoyed himself. I think he likes doing this. He likes giving the State of the Union. That was my first impression. He was energetic. He was forceful. He picked a lot of fights. Dan, if a Biden skeptical friend who didn't watch the speech asked you about the speech, what would you say?
Watch the speech.
Dick.
I mean, that's sort of the point, right? is all of the concerns we hear about the president's age, his fitness to do the job, all of that are offered by people who most likely have not seen him give a speech in 3 years. And so what you see of Joe Biden is what you hear about an 80-year-old man and the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of people saying they're concerned about his age, so more people are concerned about his age, or you see out of context, largely unflattering TikToks of the president. Watch the speech. Anyone who watched the speech would feel very good about his ability to do the job. He widely surpassed the very low bar of expectations set by the right-wing media and Donald Trump and the Republicans. And I also think there's a lot in this speech for people who are concerned about costs, the border, just whether the president's going to fight for them. So this is one of those things you would do where you would take clips from this speech. You would show that if they would watch the whole speech, God bless them, they must be a really good friend. But if not, there's a lot of really important moments we're going to talk about some of them that we should show people. And I think that was the sort of thing that would begin to change people's impressions of the president.
Yeah, it started at 9:26 p.m. It was a little delayed. I was getting a little nervous there.
Where do you think he was?
I don't know, but we were just waiting and waiting. I was like, let's start this thing. No, he was. He went after. So maybe the most surprising thing about the speech, I thought, is the first State of the Union I've ever heard where he directly went after the guy he's running against. Now, of course, nothing is normal about this situation. We have two former presidents who served in 2 consecutive terms who are now running against each other. Again, Donald Trump's going to run again. This is the 3rd time he's running for president. And so he looms over the entire night, particularly because he is basically the boss of the Republicans in Congress right now. But Joe Biden, over and over again, I thought it was going to be like oblique references. He just called out his predecessor. He calls it my predecessor many times in the speech. Let's listen.
My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Over 100 million of you can no longer be denied health insurance because of pre-existing condition. But my predecessor and many in this chamber want to take this prescription drug away by repealing Affordable Care Act. I'm not going to let that happen. We stopped you 50 times before and we'll stop you again. My predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. Oh. After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, just get over it. There's his quote, just get over it. I say, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it.
So what did you think about that? I was surprised. Were you surprised?
I was impressed that they got that through the lawyers. I mean, like we know, when Obama gave the 2012 State of the Union, heading into that campaign, you wrote that speech. We did not yet know Mitt Romney was definitely going to be his opponent, but we had a pretty good idea. And that speech was written with the idea that we were going to be facing Mitt Romney, a private equity executive who made a lot of money buying companies and firing the employees, and was promoting policies to cut taxes for rich people like himself. And remember in that speech, there was a lot about economic inequality. That was the Buffett rule, which was the rule that said that that was based on the idea that Warren Buffett used to say that his secretary paid a higher tax rate than he did. And so I expected it to be all about Trump. I didn't expect that they would directly mention him, but they did. That's great. Like, no reason to like dance around it. I kind of hate when you don't just say the thing, and they said the thing, and I think it's great. And because he did that, and I think this is the most important part about this, is it will get more attention. And one of the things that the president has really struggled with because of the sort of structural deficiencies that the Democrats have in the media is grabbing the nation's attention. And one way to do that is to break some eggs, right? Have some conflict. And this speech will get way more attention because he went directly after Trump than if he had kind of sort of given a very good speech that just was a subtle implicit White House counsel approved contrast. Just going after the president, I think it was 13 times in the speech, was a smart move.
I also think we should say Hatch Act doesn't apply to the president. So that's in terms of the president's speeches.
Yes.
Right? The president can say what he wants. But what I thought about when listening to him go after Trump, and really just the entire speech, the energy level, the feistiness, like Joe Biden is not going to let Donald Trump return to power without a real fight. Like he feels this. He genuinely believes that Donald Trump is a threat to this country, and he has heard the worries and the criticisms and all that kind of stuff. And he was up there tonight, and he was feisty. He was like, he was as energetic as I've seen him. And here's the thing too, it was not perfect, right? Like his stutter, which he has been struggling with his entire life, in which we saw him struggle with in 2020. It was definitely like, there were moments tonight where he swallowed his words like he usually does. But, and I think I've made this point before, but like it was okay. It's okay if he mumbles through some stuff, as long as he is showing energy and fight and expressing himself in a way that makes you believe it, right? And I think that there was a lot of times tonight where he, probably more times than his staff would like, that he went off script. But even those moments when he went off script, it was something that he like deeply believed. And so I think that like the performance of the speech tonight, the delivery was something that he felt deeply. And I think that goes a long way with people. And so then if you flub some lines here and there and you mumble through some words, people don't penalize you for that, because they know that what you're saying is authentic to who you are and what you believe. And I think that's what he demonstrated tonight.
And those are the sort of, not even misstatements, but sort of speech delivery moments that voters don't care about, right? It's really only people like us and reporters and close political observers who look at every single word a politician says. Voters have a much more human approach to the way people talk. That's always been true of Joe Biden. And it's just the way he delivered the speech was strong. And I think that's so important, right? It felt like a fight. It felt like the battle for the soul of the nation, if you will. But he really was, he was fighting. And that's important because the age concerns are often sometimes become a proxy for strength concerns. And if he's out there fighting and seeming energetic, it just goes a long way to making people feel much more comfortable that he can be the strong leader they want in times that feel chaotic.
I'll just tell you the Chiron on Fox News on Sean Hannity's show. It's got a video of Biden and at a rally somewhere, and then it's got Biden at the speech tonight, and it just says, "Jacked up Joe, not his normal self tonight." Which is,
sure,
I'll take it. Great. Jacked up Joe. Absolutely. All right. So there's another thing that I had not seen in a State of the Union before. He started with Ukraine at the beginning of the speech. He had a message for Putin. Let's listen.
We will not walk away. We will not bow down. I will not bow down. In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed.
He did say history's watching quite a few times. I was wondering at first when I heard, I'm like, oh, that's interesting that he's starting with Ukraine. And the reason I said that is because if you ask most Americans their top concern, they're not going to say the war in Ukraine, even though a majority of Americans support Ukraine and support sending additional aid to Ukraine to stop Putin. So he's, public opinion's on his side, but it's not the most salient issue. But then that clip that we just heard, the message to Putin, I was like, after he said that, he got applause from Democrats and Republicans. It was one of the few times during the speech that everyone stood up to applaud. So I'm betting that's why they did it first. Probably because Joe Biden thinks it's very important that we support Ukraine. He genuinely believes that, if Putin is allowed to take Ukraine, then he'll roll through NATO next. But it was interesting that they started with that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said to you earlier, in every State of the Union I've ever worked on or watched, I always go pee during the foreign policy section. And
really
so
ruined that for you.
He had a mild panic attack when he started with that, but I think he had a bunch of really big things really fast, and I think it's actually a pretty savvy understanding of both how people consume media right now and how political narratives are set. We remember this from debates, right? What happens in the first 15 minutes of a debate is if you start out a debate super strong, no matter, almost nothing happens in the last 5 minutes of the debate hurts you, right? But if you start out weak and then you get better, then the narrative sets in. So doesn't matter. So he started with several big, strong moments, lots of applause, seeming very strong, and it sort of set the stage for how people were going to think about the debate going forward. So I thought it was smart. It was good.
Well, so it was Ukraine, and then he went to January 6th, and then he talked about Roe v. Wade and IVF. Let's listen.
If you, the American people, send me a Congress that supports the right to choose, I promise you, I'll restore Roe v. Wade as the law of the land again.
So that was all right at the beginning. Ukraine, January 6th, Roe. The campaign has been saying, and Democratic strategists have been saying for some time now, that the election's going to be Dobbs and democracy. And I guess that was the signal for the beginning of the speech that they're going to be campaigning on that. And that's going to be the central focus to the campaign.
Yeah. And it's also an acknowledgement that while abortion has been has driven Democratic victories ever since the Dobbs decision, that there is work to do. You guys talked about this a few days ago, but there's work to do in helping voters understand how responsible Trump is for every single one of these abortion bans.
Yeah. Did the speech tell you anything new about Biden's reelection strategy?
I don't know if it told me anything new, but it sort of clarified, I think, some of his top priorities. First is definitely trying to reestablish some of his populist credentials to demonstrate that he is fighting for middle and working class people. That's something that he did very well on in 2020, and he has fallen behind Trump in the polling on, and Trump has like a 10-point advantage on it in the CBS poll that came out this weekend. And you see that we're talking about shrinkflation and corporate price gouging and raising taxes on corporations. That he said, I'm gonna fight like hell for a more fair tax code. And so I think that is one of the main things that he's doing there. And abortion is obviously another huge part of the agenda. And the third thing is that he is going to draw a contrast between the progress that he has made, which is strong progress, not triumphant progress, but strong progress against the chaos of the Republican House, which I think is serving as a proxy for Donald Trump in this, which is why he hit them on refusing to pass the border security bill, refusing to pass Ukraine aid, and just sort of and trying to really stoke a fight with them over a whole bunch of different things to sort of show just how sort of chaotic and overly political they are.
You mentioned that he talked about taxes. He went into a section after sort of that opening that we talked about where he discussed sort of where the country was when he took office, the economic progress we made. He sort of touted a lot of his accomplishments. And then as he spoke about his economic agenda going forward, I think that his section on taxes was probably maybe the longest section. It was certainly one of the feistiest sections in the economic section. Let's listen.
Folks at home, does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't.
So that is not going to be the sexiest section for media coverage, I would imagine. But I haven't seen focus groups yet. I haven't seen dial tests yet. I would bet that's one of the more popular sections.
Yeah. And the subtext here, which I think is worth pointing out, is that the Trump corporate tax cuts that lowered corporate tax rates, gave huge benefits to the wealthiest people, expire at the end of the next president's first year. Yeah. So if we elect Donald Trump, he's going to renew those. If we elect Joe Biden, he will let those expire and raise taxes back up to a normal, more fair level for corporations.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a great contrast with Trump. He's going to be able to kick the shit out of Trump on this. Trump already passed one of Trump's few domestic policy achievements in his first term, was passing a giant tax cut, mostly for the wealthy, which skyrocketed the deficit. And Biden's going to say, I want to raise tax. He talked about no billionaire should pay a lower tax rate than a teacher, a sanitation worker, or a nurse, much like the Buffett rule that you mentioned. Yep. One of these days we're going to get it passed. So I do think when he talks about his economic agenda, when he's out on the campaign trail, I would imagine that his tax agenda is going to be something that he really focuses on. And we have seen in polling and a lot of message testing that when you ask a lot of working class voters and a lot of these gettable voters who are persuadable, who haven't made up their minds yet, their biggest concerns about Trump are both what he might do on taxes and then also what he might do on Medicare and Social Security. And I thought Biden had a great back and forth with Republicans, similar to the one he had last year in last State of the Union about Social Security and Medicare. Let's listen.
On the other side of I want to put Social Security on the chopping block. If anyone here tries to cut Social Security, Medicare, or raise the retirement age, I will stop you. That's the proposal. Oh, no. You guys don't want another $2 trillion tax cut? I kind of thought that's what your plan was. Well, that's good to hear. You're not going to cut another $2 trillion to the super wealth. That's good to hear.
They are going to do that. And that's what Donald.
That is their plan.
That's their plan.
Yes.
That's Donald Trump's plan. They're going to cut Social Security and Medicare so they can pay for a giant tax cut for rich people. They also want to defund the IRS so that rich tax cheats can continue being rich tax cheats. That's what they want to do. Look, I would love the whole campaign to be fought about. In normal times, This is what we would fight a campaign on. This is what we fought the 2012 campaign against Mitt Romney about. And they are good issues for Democrats. It is since then, it has been very hard. It was hard for Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was hard for Biden in 20 because of COVID to have an economic message break through. But I do think that Democrats have an advantage on taxes against this Republican Party that wants to give tax cuts to the wealthy and that wants to cut Medicare and Social Security. And it was good to see Biden really zero in on that tonight, I thought.
Yeah, it was great.
So he talked about the border like we thought he was going to do. He did not announce any new executive actions on the border. He did whack the Republicans for having, and Donald Trump for killing the bipartisan border deal that came together in the Senate. And then it was an interesting moment where Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, she was like wearing her MAGA hat. She's got like a T-shirt on, and she gave Biden a button when he walked into the State of the Union. And it was a button about Laken Riley, who's the young woman from Georgia who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela. And it has been this gigantic story. You probably have not heard about it, but it has been a gigantic story on the right. It's been all over Fox, all over conservative media. She gave him this button. And as he's going back and forth with Republicans about the border, he picks up the button and he says, you know what? He's like, it's horrible that this young woman died. And he like says something to her parents, who I don't think were there. Maybe they were there, but he mentioned something about her parents. What did you think about that sort of ad lib where he went off script to talk about that?
That was certainly not his strongest part of the night. Obviously, the use of the term illegal, which he did once or twice, was unfortunate. Not how he would usually use the term undocumented. So that I think he was a little flustered in that moment. But I think, the back and forth is usually good for him. That one was less good. But in the whole of the speech, I don't think it's a huge moment, but I think we are now hitting a transition period where every State of the Union is going to be like this now.
Yeah.
Where it's, it sort of started, we've been getting there. There was such backlash when Congressman Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie" to Obama. And then it was everyone's on their best behavior for like a decade. And then last year they got into a thing with Biden, even though Biden won that exchange. Now I think every one of these members is going to try to get some attention from doing it. So this is the future. If Biden is reelected, he has 4 more of these. Democrats will probably do the same thing to Trump. So I think this is par for the course going forward.
I will say, obviously, him using the word illegal is just evidence of him being from a different generation. That's what people said, even people who supported immigration way back when. So that wasn't great. But it's very Joe Biden to take on, it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene hands him this button, and instead of being like, fuck off, I'm not going to talk about this issue. The fact that he's like, that my position is, it's of course horrific that this young woman was murdered. But what I want to do is secure the border and also give a pathway to citizenship for the millions of immigrants living here who make this country stronger, and not set up mass deportation camps like Donald Trump wants to do. And he also, you can tell he enjoyed you're right that the back and forth is going to be the norm from State of the Unions from now on. But he really enjoys it. He like you could see the guy would be very comfortable in the British Parliament with questions, right? Like he liked the back and forth. He wanted to talk to them. He's like, he mentioned Bob Casey and his